Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and right now we're looking at Azusa, Lost But Seeking, a mono-green land deck. This deck comes to us from Gaggle, who says, "This is my first attempt at a lands deck. The main areas I'm looking for with this deck is its win conditions, debating if going a little more creature heavy to lean into Craterhoof effects, like running some mana dorks and such. I'm also not quite too sure about the card draw, and once again, that card draw could be really dependent on creatures, especially small creatures, and they're not sure about the lands, if they should play more, if they miss some synergy pieces in the land slot." And then they ask for any other general misses. They tend not to play this color a lot, so I might be missing some good generic cards. Thanks for the advice. I really enjoy the content. Well, thank you so much. Definitely I'm going to have some suggestions. Green is also my least played. Actually, I think it's blue now, though I am getting some blue decks here and there. But green is close to be my least played color in Commander, or in general. But I definitely will have some suggestions here. I love Azusa. I'm used to seeing them in Amulet Titan in Modern, and that is a very different power level, but thankfully, Primeval Titan is not legal in this format. So it's not going to be as bad, I hope, but we'll have to see. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. Alright, who is Azusa Lost But Seeking, and why are they our commander in a Lands Matter deck? Well, thankfully this is going to be a really quick answer. Azusa Lost But Seeking is a 2 green, 3 mana human monk, 1/2. And she says you may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. That is pretty straightforward and really strong. So with that in mind, let's get right into the deck. And I like it. I do really like the deck. There are a lot of lands, which I really do like. In land decks, I do like playing at least close to 40 lands, and this is definitely playing it. 42 with MDFCs, really nice. And almost all of the deck is really good. It is built to be kind of a ramp deck, and not just lands matter, but we have a number of different ways to set up win states that I really do like. And I do like we're generally good almost universally on our different win conditions. There's just a few cards here and there that I think can be culled or changed. And I'm looking at my additions. I'm looking at about 9 additions. Yeah, I'm looking at about 9 additions. So we're not going to change the deck too much. I think it's in a really good place, but let's go over parts of it for sure. So our curve is pretty straightforward. It's what I expect for a lands deck and a ramp deck to go really far in one direction. We are playing a lot of 3 mana cards outside of Chord. And I will note that that is kind of a nombo with our 3 mana commander, but part of the idea is that we can play our commander and immediately play 2 additional lands, getting another cast in. However, that's not another 3-drop, so we might be a little picky on these cards. And let's just do that right away. Let's take a look at cards that we have and what's particularly good. And so, actually, before we get into that, what I'm going to say is a really important way to look at a deck like this is to go from win condition. And I don't mean the literal card or like a literal device that gets you into a win condition. I mean, what is the condition of your victory? And I'm going to suggest that in a deck like this, the win condition I would like is in one turn, creating an overwhelming amount of attackers and defeating your enemy. Now, how do we do that? Well, we have the first piece that I really like here, which is Concordant Crossroads. I find this to be pretty much essential if we're doing it on our own turn. We don't have to do it on our own turn, but it's close. There's a few ways we can do this on other people's turns, but this really alleviates this. So it makes it so whatever creatures we play will have haste on that turn. So what are we going to do with that? Well, we want to create an overwhelming army of attackers. And we have a few main ways to do that. Field of the Dead is my favorite because it is on theme, it's a land, it's easy for you to grab, it's easy for you to trigger. This is the best kind of card to make massive, massive armies. I have a friend who plays Jund lands, and Field of the Dead is almost always the biggest threat in the deck, and so that to me should be your primary win condition. After which, the classic Avenger of Zendikar is really, really good. For 7 mana, you play it, create a torrential amount of 0/1s, and then play at least a few lands to pump them up, or spend the rest of your mana on something like Finale of Devastation to grow the entire board, and all of a sudden you have a very, very lethal attacker. And of course, in those situations, Finale of Devastation, grabbing Craterhoof Behemoth, or what would we call it? Court of Calling, grabbing Craterhoof Behemoth, is also going to be lethal. Once again, haste being incredibly important. Now, there's a few things we can do to make this happen on other people's turns. I would say nominally the ones that I like are Emergence Zone, enabling us to get a bunch of flash cards in one turn, so on our opponent's turn, so we don't need that haste. And we might have flash off of something else. I looked, but I could be wrong. Okay, maybe that's the only one, but it is a pretty good one, I will say. After that, we have our Eldrazi, which are just kind of like play 'em and smash cards, and I don't particularly mind that. I think that's fine. The value of both of these cards on cast are just really, really good, and being able to get them in other ways from our deck or back from the graveyard is accessible, and I do really, really like that. So that's generally it. Cultivator Colossus and other cards like this where they're a single card getting really, really big, I don't mind it, but it's not necessarily the best plan for me, and I might have some exchanges for that, but Cultivator Colossus can often draw you into your combo, so that one gets to stay, but I just wouldn't consider them as a, this is going to take out multiple opponents, because it'll probably take them out one at a time. All right, so let's go through a few of our cards that pop out to me, and let's see what we can say. So, Nissa Vital Force is the first one that really catches my eye. I recognize that it's in 2 turns. You get the emblem that says whenever a land enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and I do get that's really strong. I have a stronger card at 3 mana, and I think that's going to do better. I don't think this is that bad, but at 5 mana, Planeswalkers are incredibly vulnerable in Commander, right? Because they need to be able to last 3 opponents with creatures. And when you play Nissa Vital Force and then uptick, your opponents know what you're trying to do, right? It's very, very clear, and they're going to work to defeat Nissa as fast as possible, not including things like just straight up removal, Generous Gift, Beast Within, all of that. So Nissa's time on the battlefield is really suspect. She's not going to stay around for long, and for that reason, I don't really love her here, and I think should be cut. And obviously, I wouldn't consider this to be a particularly useful ability, even in a lands deck. Making 5/5 elementals just to untap a land isn't ideal, because once they become creatures, they are vulnerable to removal, but I will say it's not the worst thing, it's also not the best thing. Looking down at other targets. Endurance is one that's noteworthy to me. I do like Endurance, don't get me wrong, but I find outside of specific strategies, it's not going to do very well. Like, this is really, really good if you have it, the turn Reanimator is reanimating cards, or if you have it, the turn someone's casting something from their graveyard. But because it's not like a generic constant effect, I find it to be a little weak, right? Because of that, we've got the problem where, how do I put this? We have the problem where a deck like Aristocrats doesn't care, right? A deck that's constantly bringing cards from its graveyard also doesn't care. A deck that is playing against you and can play around Endurance with counter magic or waiting for the right time also doesn't care. So this is a very, very narrow hate card that is really, really good at high levels, but anything outside of like CEDH and high power commander, it's just not as good. If it targeted all your opponents, like if all opponents, but it's per player, it'd be much better, but that's not the case. Now you might say, Curse, this can also target ourselves. I don't know how much we need to do that and how much that helps us. We have a lot of cards such as Crucible of Worlds and Conduit of Worlds, both of which are just really good with our cards in our graveyards, so we don't really want to interfere with that too much. Looking through the rest, Tireless Provisioner doesn't feel as good as Tireless Tracker. Now, both our Tracker and Provisioner are cards that get a lot better when we go into artifacts and where treasure matters, whereas this deck doesn't really care for treasure. You're already generating tons of mana. Food is also not too interesting to you. However, I will note that Tracker creating clues is good, because that is card draw, so I wouldn't mind the Tracker, but the Provisioner feels just a little weaker here and probably not as necessary. So I think that can be an easy cut, and once again, at 3 mana, we don't mind cutting that card. Ashaya. Ashaya is a card I don't particularly like. They don't have trample or any form of evasion, so they're just a big beater. And yeah, they're a big beater, but they're not like a huge beater. Now, there are some combos you can do with this by turning your like creatures into lands. They come in and they do ETBs. But traditionally, a lot of our landfall triggers or ETB triggers create tokens, which do not work with this kind of thing. Now, I know there's probably some other combos, and I haven't seen one in here. So if you're going to play them, I think you have to find out what that combo is and play it. But at the moment, I don't really think it's worth the value of, getting extra landfalls from your creatures, your non-token creatures. I guess the question is this: what do you think it's easier for you to play? Lands or creatures? And I'm going to suggest in the deck where you get to play 2 more lands a turn, and obviously lands don't cost mana, you're going to have an easier time playing lands. So I feel like Ashaya is a little bit wasted. Perennial Behemoth is such a great name. I really do like this card's name. And it is very strong. I love it. I just wanted to stop and point out I like its name. Ancient Green Warden is great. Rampaging Bailiffs. If these creature tokens came out with trample, I wouldn't mind them. But like, notice the difference, right? Notice the difference between this and Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead is much easier to tutor, can be triggered the same amount of times a turn after you get 7 different lands, which is really easy to do, and doesn't cost additional mana to play, right? Whereas Rampaging Bailiffs, you have to pay the 6 mana, you have to keep it alive, and you get 4/4s. So though Rampaging Bailiffs makes basically double the power in tokens, I don't find that it's twice as powerful as Field of the Dead. I would suggest a lot of things like being able to bring it back with Crucible of Worlds, or we just saw Ancient Green Warden, which also would double. I guess that's all triggers, so that doesn't matter. But things like that, like we have so many ways to get Field of the Dead back that I think is just a much more resilient threat, whereas Baloth's just, 1 removal spell will get rid of them, and after which you might not be able to get it again. And yeah, you'll have a few 4/4s, but compared to the army you could have, it's just not going to feel as impressive. This is one of those things that, like, compared to Scoot Swarm, like, you can tell the difference between these cards. This is half the mana, and this is definitely more powerful, right? Mainly, I will say the thing to remember is that we're going to try to superpower our tokens with Finale of Devastation or Craterhoof Behemoth. So with those in mind, either we're making an infinite number and the power doesn't matter, so it doesn't matter which tokens you're making, or we're making enough that when we buff them, the power once again doesn't matter. So with that in mind, I do not particularly like the Bailiffs, and I think they're an easy cut. The rest of the creatures are good. Let's take a look. I think these are fine. Okay, so Rishkar's Expertise is a card I'm really heavy on. And I think here's another point that I'm going to be a bit rough on it. So the idea here is Rishkar's expertise is good when we have a very large creature. And for us, we do not have the means of easily making large creatures. We have the ability to, let's see, once we get to, like, especially if we're taking out Ashayas and the like, we're probably outside of our like star creatures. We're probably, it's pretty hard to get one really big creature. And with that in mind, I think Rishkar's expertise will only draw us a few cards at most. And with that in mind, I have to say, do we really care for the Cascade? Well, that's not Cascade, but the cast of 5 mana or less free spell. We have the means to cast these spells pretty easily. So I feel like it's kind of wasted here. I'm going to give like my generic draw card after this, but there is also another draw card that I think is very good. But here, I just think it's okay. I don't think you're going to draw a lot. You don't need the other ability. So this is an easy, both sides of this card is pretty bad. So I would say don't play it, especially on your, like, it's still 6 mana. Tooth and Nail is great. Do we have an instant win combo? We do. We have Craterhoof Behemoth and Cultivator Colossus. So if we can Tooth and Nail for 9, we will immediately win the game, ideally, which is pretty good. So love that here. Last March of the Ents. I do like Last Munch of the Ents. This can't be countered. Draw cards. Put any number of creature cards. So this I don't mind as much because the second... So toughness is nice because we do have some better hits, especially something like Perennial Behemoth, which is 7. I do like that. And you can reanimate it for 2. But Last March of the Nth's second ability, I find, is a lot stronger because 8 mana can add up to more than just the more than 15 mana that you have access to. So you could cast a bunch of these creatures all at once, especially if you've been drawing a lot. I do like that here. I will say it won't trigger your Eldrazi, which is a bit of a bummer, but you can get your Eldrazi out early, which is kind of nice. So with that in mind, it's good. And it not being counterable honestly makes the difference for me. So definitely play this one. I think it's very good. Looking through our instants, they're very good. Return of the Wild Speaker is once again passable because of that second ability. Non-human creatures you control get +3/+3, allowing you to attack with a bunch of 0/1 plants or a bunch of 2/2 zombies and turn that into a lethal swing. So I do like it here. I don't know how often you're going to be drawing reasonable cards off of this card, but having this as both a finisher and a draw card is much better. You can notice here the kind of difference, right? Like Rishkar's expertise, this card's going to haunt me forever, but you can see that like the difference in power between these cards, right? They almost all have that first line of text that's the same, but the second ability is very different every single time. I think my cat's trying to get into the room. So yeah, looking at Rishkar's expertise, we can see the sheer difference between these cards. Like that first text is really not the best part always, because in certain decks it's just not going to do anything, but that second half really holds up the card. Whereas here, this is something that's really accessible. Here, it's almost the same thing, but the sheer number of mana you can get from it is a lot higher, and the lack of, the fact that it can't be countered is also really good. And this being a finisher, like just the difference between these cards. Okay, I could rant about this for days. I'm just gonna keep going. Looking at our artifacts are very good. Looking at our enchantments are very good. I feel like Defense of the Heart is interesting to me. Do we have a combination that wins when we do not have... Like, I think we still win either way, right? I think with Craterhoof and Cultivator, that should be enough. But Avenger of Zendikar coming in too early won't create enough bodies, is what my brain says, but I could be wrong about that. So very good card. Defense of the Heart is a great card, does attract a lot of danger. All right, let's get into additions, and I've got quite a bit of wide selection of additions. So we're just gonna go in almost a random order. Let's start with draw. So Harmonize is our easy draw card here. Nice and simple, draw 3 for 4 mana. This is something I just tend to like in a lot of decks where you have a lot of you have a lot of draw that's very dependent on things going well for you. And this is just a card that just draws you cards. It's always good throughout the game. It's a classic. I'm also not going to lie, I'm always a fan of cards with little, like small amounts of text. Just 3 words here, and that's all you need. So big fan of this. The other much stronger draw card here is Horn of Greed, which says whenever a player plays a land, that player draws a card. Now note that this is play and not landfall. So there is a difference, but it is worth noting that, you are getting a lot of landfall just playing triggers. You get 3 a turn, whereas your opponents get 1 a turn. So you are even with them, but you're probably going to be the one that can take the most advantage of it. And if you have other means to kind of increase the number of lands you get to play, such as, isn't there another one? Am I additional? I thought there was the other enchantment. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Additional. I forgot to do 1 mana, but that's fine. Let's go by mana value. Exploration. So if you played also, this is one you could play as well, though I am noticing it is about $9. That's not great, but this is another effect that you can easily put into your deck, give you another play, and this will all increase the power of Horn of Greed. I think there are downsides to this card, but I still do think it is rather good, and you're going to be very, very happy with the result. Next, this is kind of a pseudo draw card. I saw it on your side here, and it definitely needs to go in. Life from the Loam is just an exceedingly powerful card in land decks. Ooh, a lot of misspeaking today, I feel. In land decks, Life of the Loam is really good, and you'll find that it almost universally reads draw 3. Like, think about it like this. You give up your draw, you mill 3 cards, you get this into your hand, and then you cast it, and most likely you have more than 3 cards that are relevant. You're going to play all 3 because of how Azusa works. There you go. You've drawn and played 3 cards just off of the back of 1 card. And next turn, if you want, you can just do it again. Or off of Horn of Greed, you can just do it again. That's just phenomenal. So, very easy inclusion. Looking at the next one. Okay, let's see. Let's do another. Okay, this is a card that I've been kind of hard on. This card type, where this is a kind of creature that just, all it does is it grows from the number of lands you have in play, and I've been hard on those ones, but the difference is this one ETBs and gives you a land on the battlefield. So we're really playing it for the second effect here, and not so much at the first part. Like, the first part is just gravy, that we get a really big Hydra. But this ability to put any land tapped is just so strong, because like I mentioned before, one of our main win conditions is just Field of the Dead. And so this being able to be another ability to throw a land into play, or another land that I might show in a second, it's so strong, right? It is incredibly powerful, and I think it's worth running. And then you just have a big beater. It doesn't have trample, unfortunately, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Looking at, I have 2 X spells, and let's go through them. The first one is kind of simple, and it is a win condition of itself, and that's Awaken the Woods. Awaken the Woods is create X 1/1 Forest Dryad land creature tokens. So these are just fantastic because every single one of these is a landfall trigger, so you can play it early game, mid game to get a bunch of triggers. But what I really like about this is that with enough mana, this will just generate enough of an army to then be able to pump up the army and immediately win. Thank goodness they're not humans. And what's also really good about this is, of course, this is just another card that works with Emergence Zone. So you can cast it on your last opponent's end step, make a bunch of landfall triggers happen, make a huge army, go to your turn, they lose Summoning Sickness, and you immediately can spend the rest of your mana to pump them and win. So Awakening the Woods feels like a really good inclusion here, albeit kind of an expensive one, but lands decks go up in price really quickly, so just be aware. Then another one, considerably cheaper, is Open the Way. Open the Way was a card I kind of just didn't really care about for a while, but then I started to really think about it, and I saw it in play a few times, and I was really impressed. So Open the Way is actually a 6 mana card, and X can only be 4 because it's a 4-player game. And what this does is it reveals the top 4 cards off your deck that are lands. So you flip until you reveal 4 lands, and you put them into play tapped. Now, what I like about this is not only is this kind of a smaller version of Awaken the Woods, but it is one of those abilities that doesn't say basic. And whenever you see the lack of that word, your alarm bells should go off in your head when you're dealing with like land strategies, right? The fact that this doesn't say basic lands means that we could be getting any one of our much more powerful lands onto the battlefield. And that's a dramatic difference. Now, it's going to get about 10% of your lands, and with that many lands, there's definitely some cards that are just not as good as others, but if you're trying to hit like some of the good ones, you just have a much higher chance of doing this. The only downside is you don't get to play cards like Boseiju, because if they just go into play, you lose their ability, but with the ability of having like Guildless Commons, if you are going to play it, which I would, you can bounce it back to hand and go with it anyway. So this is a card that I think is really, really good. It's very, very good for that early game, get 4 landfall triggers kind of effect. And also the ramp that this deck is capable of, 6 mana to 10 mana, is really, really good. So I do really like this ability. Finally, we have one more finisher, which is much cheaper than I always think it is. It is Dark Depths. Why is Dark Depths here? Well, one, you could just pay the cost and make a 20/20 indestructible flying creature, which I think we do have the token now. We do. That's spooky. Or you can just use Thespian Stage, which is the one you have here, which is the classic combo between the two of them. If you're not sure about it, Thespian Sage becomes Dark Depths. They're both legendary, so Dark Depths, the original, is sacrificed, but Thespian Stage then sees itself having no ice counters, is immediately sacrificed, and creates a Marit Lage token. Now, 2020 Flying Indestructible is not as good as you think it is. I'm going to be honest. It's good, but it's not crazy good. If you get this out early, you can probably take a player out, but there's going to be players with like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, and they're just not really going to care about this card. That being said, I still think it's rather strong. It has the same mechanic that we can keep bringing this back from the graveyard and keep doing it again every time we lose the Marit Lage token. Remember, they're legendary, so if you try to create 2 tokens, you're going to be sad. But otherwise, I think we're just going to be very, very happy having this card just belonging in the lands. It's pretty cheap, and you're going to be every now and then able to knock someone out of the game incredibly fast. And then I have one more addition, and I think this is a card that maybe should see more play in decks like this. I was saying before, one of the really big parts about this deck is its resilience. So if you lose Field of the Dead, we have so many ways to get it back onto the battlefield. Or into our hand, then onto the battlefield. If you lose Dark Depths, we have so many ways to get it back onto the battlefield. A bunch of other abilities and like cards, our Ulamog, our Kozilek, our big cards have so many ways of staying in the game. However, if they are exiled, which is becoming more and more of a common thing, we don't have any recourse for that. But we do. We have Rift Sweeper. And Rift Sweeper is just such a good card for these kind of strategies. It just straightforwardly says that when Rift Sweeper enters the battlefield, you pick a face-up card that's exiled, and its owner shuffles it into their library. This is just really, really good, mainly because you don't even need to worry about like secondary graveyard hate effects, unlike Pull from Eternity that puts it back in the graveyard. Rift Sweeper just puts the card into your deck. Now, it's not your hand, but you have the means of digging that card out of your deck again, and you're going to be really, really happy of being able to do that. So this is just like insurance. I imagine 90% of the time, this card isn't like insanely good. It will stop certain things of your opponents interacting, like suspend cards, and I think there's a few other things you can do with this that's interesting. But all that aside, sometimes it will just put you back in the game when you felt like you lost your main win condition. So Something worth considering, not necessary. It really depends on the power level you're playing with. But if you start feeling like you're being hated out by Exile, Rift Sweeper is the way to go. And that's generally going to be my advice for this deck. It's really good. I really don't have that much to say. I think it's in a really good place. I don't think you're really missing anything gigantic. Right, I will take a moment to talk about the idea, because I've just basically skipped it, which might give you my opinion, but the idea of whether or not you should put a bunch of mana dorks into this, and the answer is really no. There are lands decks that benefit from mana dorks, and I will say there's something to be said about being able to play Azusa turn 2, but you don't really have the meaningful room for him, because you'd be having to make a lot of cuts, because you want at least 4 to 6 mana dorks, and that's cutting into your lands. Even if we cut all the cards I wasn't too impressed with, we're going to be still left with just way, way, way too many cards that don't fit, and we're going to have to pull out some lands, and I really, really don't like that idea. So with that in mind, I think you're just going to be happier to not play the mana dorks. If we had other colors and other win conditions and other like things we want to accelerate into, like if we were blue-green and we want to get into Rhystic Study real fast, things like that, I might be kind of more attuned to that. But if you just play something like Exploration, this is just better than any mana dork you'll play, right? If you wanted, you could also play, let's see, 1 mana green Aura. And this should get us our lands. So like Abundant Growth, let's do EDH Rec. Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl are the main ones, but Abundant Growth isn't bad sometimes, just for the draw. But obviously we're only in one color, so Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl are the ones you could pick up as pseudo mana dorks, because they're going to be very, very good at doing what they need to do. However, they will not be vulnerable to board wipes. So I do like this. If you want to play them, play these. But that doesn't solve the whole problem you were saying of whether or not you should play more creature cards. And I'm just going to say no. I think the deck is just better without it. I would test these cards, try the deck out for a while, and if it's not really jiving with you and you're feeling like you want creatures, send it back. We'll do it again, and we'll do it into a creature build. We can definitely do that. It looks a little different, but as the deck is now, I think you'll be more successful with the lower amount of creatures. And if you want to send me that draft, there is a link in the video description down below. That draft of this deck or any deck can be sent that way. And if you want the deck you send me to be one of my donation decks that I do every time I make episodes, there is a link down there below. It'll let you skip the line a little bit. And finally, if you could like, comment, subscribe, I would be very, very appreciative. Our channel is still growing, and your support is very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much, Gaggle. Thank you for the deck, and good luck building it. Let me try to save on Azusa. Wow, what a nice way to end the video.